Well, welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host, Nathan Battishall, and this episode has been a long time in the making. I've had numerous people asking to do a podcast and to discuss manor houses via the CDC pathway. This has been an interesting one. Manor houses have been in effect from a CDC perspective for quite a while now. They came in under the Low-Rise Diversity Housing Code, or the SEP, which came about a few years ago now. It's been into effect for about over 5 years, maybe even 6 years now. And that code came about as a result of a bottleneck that we were seeing in New South Wales, especially on small residential projects such as dual occupancies, multi-dwelling. So what happened, the state government brought in a state environmental planning policy around these small developments that if they met the certain criteria, that they would enable them to go through a complying development, meaning that you can bypass council, bypass a development application through council and go directly through a private certification with a fast-track approval. So we've seen a flurry of duplexes, dual occupancies over this period of time come in under that low-rise diversity code. To a lesser extent, we've seen a lot of terraces come under that code, which we've spoken about both of those development types on this podcast numerous times. For the first time, we're speaking about manor houses, and the reason we've taken so long to talk about manor houses is because it's to a far lesser extent that this type of development has been carried out across New South Wales. Now, as someone who has been involved in a good number of manor house CDCs, I am able to talk on this subject because we have executed approvals for these projects. We've walked clients through them. But we've noticed and found that manor houses have been, to a lesser extent, popular since the Low-Rise Diversity Code came into effect. Now, what is a manor house? A lot of people, when they think of manor house, again, when we talk about terrace under the Low-Rise Diversity Housing Code, a lot of people think the old Balmain type terrace, whereas or the Paddington-style terrace. Now, when a lot of people think manor house, they think like a guest house or a boarding house, or they think like a house where there's a whole bunch of bedrooms in it. Or a manor house, a lot of people think like a really big house. Under the SEP, a manor house is simply maximum four dwellings or a minimum of 3. So it's 3 to 4. Whereas terraces can be multiple. You could do 10 terraces if you had enough land. Under the Low-Rise Diversity Housing Code, manor houses are 3 to 4. Now, for it to be a manor house, you have generally 2 on the bottom and 1 on top, or most common, or all of the ones we've been involved in have been 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. So what makes it a manor house is that there's a separation between the floor. So generally you have, obviously a duplex or a terrace will generally have like a party wall, which is a fire separation wall that divides the 2 dwellings, that has to comply with the NCC in terms of fire, BCA in terms of fire separation, and has to achieve that fire rating. In a manor house, you'll generally have you will have dwellings on the bottom and dwellings above. I have seen some where it's 1 at the top, a larger one on the top, 2 on the bottom. So essentially I liken them to this. And it's an interesting one because even since this code came out, it's a really tricky product to distinguish what it is. And I liken it to like a small set of units. We see obviously high-rise units in a lot of city areas really dominating. Obviously Harry Triguboff really was the forerunner when it came to units, bringing the old great Australian dream was to own a half-acre block with a house on it, and then Harry Triguboff really turned that on its head when he brought that ability for a lot of people on lower incomes to be able to get into the housing market by buying units. And I guess one of the state government's initiatives with the Manor House was to try and create the ability to do more on a site that you may not normally be able to do, like a multi-dwelling development on, to a smaller scale, and be able to do things like a manor house. So essentially a small unit block. I liken it to a small unit block because the reality is it's not a townhouse, and in a lot of ways it's not a unit either, like your typical high-rise type unit, but it essentially is more like a small unit development. And the reason I liken a manor house to a small unit development is because it comes under the same class. And this is where I guess I want this episode to really just be able to help educate listeners, because yourself as in residential investors, developers, people wanting to generate wealth through property and doing small residential projects, manor houses are one is a way that a lot of people are discovering. Is it feasible? Is it possible? And for me, I wanted to do this episode. I'm sure we'll do a backup episode where we can drill a little bit deeper into manor houses. But I think for me, there are some positives with manor houses, but I think there's a lot of things that people don't weigh up and they don't think about too. And it's possibly, for me, a reason why we haven't seen them really take off like some of the other development types, especially dual occupancies under the low-rise diversity code. But one thing first and foremost to know with a manor house, it comes under a different type of construction to your typical house, duplex, or terrace type development. This comes under a Class 2 construction. And anyone who's been in and around the construction space will understand that a Class 2 and a Class 3 construction is quite extensive when it comes to doing these type of projects. Under this Class 2 construction, you require a different level of certification, and your designer, your engineers, all of your consultants, your builder, and also your certifier all have to have this registration. And one of the tricky parts of that is that there's a lot of consultants that don't have that registration. A lot of certifiers either don't have it and don't want to do it, and then there's a lot of builders that don't have it, especially a lot of smaller residential builders. So all of a sudden, a lot of the builders that do have that registration are generally doing high-rise type construction or larger high-set type residential construction. And so all of a sudden you've got a smaller pool of team or consultants and contractors in that space. And it can be quite both competitive, but also it's specialised and it's quite time consuming. So one thing I found, a lot of people have come unstuck because of the bottlenecks in that, firstly the planning process, but then the building process. So in terms of a manor house under a CDC, so just to break it down, so the state government brought this initiative in through the low-rise diversity housing code, the ability to do manor houses. So it's not available in every area, although under the new mid to low-rise housing policy, there is some new areas that have opened up that will allow multi-dwelling, one of those being manor houses now in certain areas. In R2 zoned areas, it's opened up opportunities, but a lot of them still need to go through a DA pathway. There's a lot that you can do CDC, but it opens up. And obviously, because it's classed as a multi-dwelling development, the big thing to look at is that particular site that you're looking at to do the manor. Does it enable multi-dwelling in that particular council? And then what lot size is required? Because if you look under the SEP says that you're required to have, so for a manor house, if you look at the actual design guideline, if you look at the SEP, some of the requirements. So if there's no minimum lot size in that particular council, so let's just say it's an R2 zoned area that allows multi-dwelling. Now, a lot of R2 areas don't allow multi-dwelling, but let's just say the particular council you're looking at allows for R2, multi-dwelling in R2 zoned area. And let's just say it doesn't have a minimum lot size for multi-dwelling. Well, the minimum lot size under the SEP for a manor is 600 square metres and a 15-metre frontage. So they're a couple of your requirements from the start. So you're required to have 15 metres at the building line, minimum, and you're also required to have a 600 square metre block. Now, let's just say that a particular council requires 900. Let's just say, let's use Shoalhaven Council, just south of Sydney, a couple of hours south of Sydney, for example. Let's just say you've got an R1 site there that allows R1 in that area, allows multi-dwelling. Let's just say that it's a 600 square metre block. Well, straight away you can't do a multi-dwelling in that particular council because you're required to have 900 square metres. So that discounts it. So essentially, because in the actual design guideline for the manor houses, there's certain areas where it points back to the LEP, and minimum lot size is one thing. And a lot of people get unstuck with this because I've seen it where sadly people have bought sites and they've said, oh, but it's 600, the block's 600 square metres, but they're not realising that in the actual LEP, that's why it's important to check the LEP. Is there a minimum lot size for multi-dwelling development? Some even have a minimum lot size for manor house. Most of them, it's more to do with multi-dwelling because it's multi is 3 or more, which considers it multi-dwelling. Now, you need to check that because if the LEP has a lot size, then you need to abide by that. The 600 square metres is only if that particular council doesn't have a minimum lot size. So you can't just go, oh, it's 400 square metres, so I'll do a manor. Well, it's not possible. So that's a key thing. But like anything, just because that's the minimum lot size, you still need to fit the product on the site. And there's a lot of ins and outs and different factors involved. And one big thing I've found that, let's just say the side setback, you can go within 900 of a boundary. Now, that's all well and good, but because it's a Class 2 construction, all of a sudden you can then, because you've gone closer than 3 metres, for example, to that boundary, you've still, because it's a Class 2, you've got to comply with your fire separations and that sort of thing. And then a lot of people don't factor these things in where, yes, you may be able to do a manor house on a 15-metre wide block, but by being so close to the boundary, there's other conditions that come into play based on the NCC then that where if you're within a certain distance, like, for example, closer than 3 metres then to a side boundary, closer than 1.5, and then all of a sudden you might need to develop performance solutions. You may have to then fire rate walls. You may have to fire rate around windows. There's a lot of things that can come into effect that can obviously expedite your construction costs because you haven't factored in some of those little elements. So I've actually found I find the best manor house is the type of manor house where you've got like a 3-metre separation on the side. So then to make a manor house work, all of a sudden you're looking at maybe a wider block where you like. Again, you've got to make the construction numbers stack up, and that's one thing I'm finding with the manors, that the construction costs are often not stacking up. And I guess one of the state government's initiatives with the manors was to try and get more dwellings onto a block and make it more affordable, but it actually hasn't really worked that way because they're quite expensive to build. They're definitely a lot more expensive than a townhouse. Because the construction costs, because of the fact it's a Class 2 construction, all of a sudden it's less competitive because you don't have a lot of builders in that space. Obviously, you've got to go suspended concrete flooring on the first floor, which means that obviously you've got to have, you've got to have your solid ground floor. You can't do as much lightweight. There's obviously a lot of other consultants involved, like facade engineering, fire engineering, hydraulics, and there's a whole lot at play that can really, I guess, impact the ability to do these manors under the low-rise code. So that's a factor that comes into play. And so although it says, yes, you can do it on a 15-metre wide block, to get often the best outcome, especially in an area where you've got to make the numbers really work, all of a sudden you might need, say, 3 metres, and then obviously you might need to allow what type of car parking you're going to have. Because under the low-rise diversity guideline for manors, you're required to have 1 car parking space per dwelling. So if you've got 4, your typical 4, you need 4 car spaces. Now, one good thing about the manors is it doesn't have to be a garage. It can be open car parking. It can be, and often we're finding that's the best way to make it work. We have seen manors where people are doing basements. The tricky thing is with the basement, obviously, often we're finding the numbers just aren't working for doing basements. In order to do basements, you often need to be in a higher spec'd up area where you can justify the resale price to be able to do the basement. So we're finding that's really tricky, making numbers work. In certain areas where you can get a bit more size, you can get a scenario where you can have closed in car parking spaces. But one of the tricky things you'll find once you start to get to the point where you're getting bigger sites, let's say 8, 900, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 square metre site, it's all well and good to get a manor on a 1,500 square metre site, but all of a sudden you're looking at that site and you're thinking, well, we can get 4 townhouses on it, or we can get 5 townhouses on it, or even 6. So why would you do 4 manors? Why would you do 4 units or a manor development when you can do 5 or even 4, the equivalent of 4 townhouses on a site where it's going to be lower construction costs? You can often, in most areas, well, in all areas virtually, you're going to get a higher resale for a townhouse versus a unit. So that's where the numbers really don't work, and that's where you really have to be able to get the site for the price of where maybe you may have otherwise only been, and this is where I've seen it work okay, where a lot of clients who are looking at these as more of a longer term hold, and this is probably a big thing. If you're looking to generate profit through developing manors and then selling them, it often doesn't stack up great. I've seen a couple of builders do okay with it, where the idea is sell 3, keep 1 with really minimal debt attached to it. But I guess there is opportunity if you are more of a builder developer, where you could possibly maybe sell 1 to clear some debt, lower some debt, or sell 2 and then keep 2 with some debt attached. But I find in terms of selling 4, it's often not overly profitable. And one area you can do okay is if you're able to get the site where it might just be not suitable to do multi-dwelling. So the only option for that site is to do a duplex, a dual lock. So the rest of the market sees it only for a dual lock. You see it for the fact that you can do a manor on that site, so you can get 4 on a site everyone else only got 2. But like I said, the moment you can do multi-dwelling on that site, often you'll find 3 townhouses will stack up better than doing 4 manor units under the CDC. Is the numbers just don't work. In terms of the construction costs, like it's obviously it's tricky because it's a class 2. So you've straight away it really wipes out a huge percentage of builders across all of the state, because a lot of builders aren't registered for class 2. A lot of builders aren't interested in doing class 2. And obviously class 2 comes under quite a strict regime as well, and which is a good thing. Obviously we saw the building commissioner come right into this space off the back of some disasters that happened in Sydney. And I think it's been a good thing because it's obviously cleaned up the industry. There is already a huge amount of builders doing the right thing and running their sites in a professional manner, in a safe manner, adhering to the building codes. But we obviously saw a lot of builders that weren't, or a number of builders that weren't, and it has cleaned up the industry, and it's ensured that they stay on top of things professionally, keeping their sites safe, keeping their sites well looked after, that construction methods are being followed, that they're not cutting corners. I think that's been a good thing, but it has the one challenge of what it has done, and I don't say this as a negative, I just say this to help educate yourself as someone doing projects, residential projects. One thing it has done, especially for the manors obviously got introduced right in the mix of where a lot of this was blowing up. And it's brought a lot of fear about with the manors because they've been categorised. They're obviously under the same class 2 level of construction, but the problem is we're seeing just an overpricing of manors, both from a construction point of view, but also a planning and approval point of view. And there's a lot of certifiers, a huge amount of certifiers can't even certify a manor house because they don't have the particular registration. So we're seeing a real backlog. Now, just the small class twos, like a lot of people go down the path of a CDC, obviously to avoid delays and avoid time constraints. But one thing I've found with the Manors, dual locks, terraces, no issue because they're the class 1B. They can move through a lot quicker. But the problem is with the class 2s and the class 3s, in this case the class 2s with the Manors, they come under obviously the same, I guess, element of compliance as higher set units. So straight away I tell people, like, you're looking at anywhere from 50 to 70 grand of additional consultants, because you look at for dual lock or terraces, there's a lot of consultants you don't need for that smaller type development that for a manor you need. For example, you need your fire engineering, you need your mechanical, you need your hydraulic engineering, you need your facade engineering, you need your access consultant. Then you've got your structural, your stormwater. They've got to have another level of registration. So they've got to have their class 2. Then your architect, building designer, they've got to have their class 2 registration. So all of a sudden it's a specialised registration. Then there's a lot of backward and forward and a lot more collaboration between consultants to get it right. And then the approval process, let's just say the standard approval process might be anywhere from 10 to 15 working days to approve a general typical CDC, whether that be a granny flat or a house or a duplex CDC or some terraces. All of a sudden, like in my experience and from what I've seen and from talking to a lot of other people that who are doing manors in the industry under CDC, like a lot of these are taking anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And a lot of it's because the certifiers are under so much, I guess, pressure to ensure that everything is 100%, that there's a lot of backward and forward and then having to get verification and having to really make sure there's a full collaboration between all the consultants and that all the documentation is Mickey Mouse, so that if any audit does take place, that it's clean and that it's clear. So although it's a terrific thing of what's happened in our industry, it's cleaned it up. I guess, unfortunately, I think the Manors, and I'm cautious on this episode not to be negative on Manors, because I like the philosophy. I was actually most excited about the Manors when it came out, because I thought it was a great opportunity to create a type of housing that possibly has been missing in the market, a type of housing that may actually be able to help get younger couples into the market, also a type of housing to be able to create some smaller residential developments where investors who want to hold stock long term are able to do it. But I guess the challenge is from a planning and then from a construction point of view, a lot of the delays and a lot of the unknowns involved in that class 2 space. I think it's scared a lot of people off, where the manors just no longer stack up. That in a lot of areas they're not stacking up from a feasibility point of view due to construction costs and time delays and that side of it. And they're obviously not stacking up from a time point of view too, because it's taking probably a similar amount of time to do a manor CDC as, say, buying a site a little bit bigger and doing a 4 townhouse development site through a DA. Sometimes we're finding that they're much of a muchness in terms of time frames. So I think that's one of the big myths for people to put away, the fact that it's a fast track approval like another typical duplex or terrace development. That hasn't been the case of what I've seen in my experience, and we've been involved in a good number of them now. It is quite time consuming, but for me, the big thing is you've got to factor in a lot more in terms of your approval process, in terms of costings. There's a lot more consultants involved. There's a lot more collaboration between consultants. And then from a construction point of view, it's quite costly because of the level of detail that needs to go in, but also obviously in a lot of areas, like some areas, suspended concrete floors on that first floor stack up, especially in the nice high-end areas, high-end projects. But the problem is, even in a mid-spec sort of mid-spec area, you've got to do this suspended flooring system. And again, it can stack up well if you're a concreter developer or you're a builder developer, or even like we had one client was a bricklayer and a concreter. So that was a good mix, and that clients like that can sometimes make it work. But I think it's just important to have your eyes wide open in that space. So the key is just to really run your numbers and make sure you factor in, for me, extra time. So don't skimp out on your time if you are serious about doing a manor. I think if you've got the capital and the ability to hold, there is an option. I've seen one thing I've seen in the industry, and there's a few people in this space, which I think is an interesting space, and I think it's great that we've seen a couple of leaders in New South Wales investigating and investing in this space is going down that pathway of the SDA or the NDIS, doing manors under the NDIS. So that's where it can be quite lucrative. It can be quite nice because you can create 4 nice, well set up units, or 3 nice, well set up units that are geared up for SDA. And I've seen some really great ones with a nice lift, and just really nice spaces for residents under the SDA, where you can create a really nice development in that space. And that's where it can sometimes stack up if you're doing, for example, like a high physical support setup, where you all of a sudden can generate possibly the rental income to meet the rising costs in terms of the construction side of it, where you're able to get the rental yield. I guess just from a investor point of view, you'll find out one of the tricky things. You'll find that you'll generally get the rental yield just often doesn't make it, the development stack up well if you're just renting it out to general population. The other thing with the manor is you're limited to your size too. See, the maximum size you can do a manor is 400 square metres, which for it to be 400 square metres, it's got to be on quite a large, significant size block. And then for it to be on such a significant size block, it rarely ever stacks up, because you're going to get a lot more townhouses often on that large size block. But essentially the way it's calculated, the GFA, or they call it the ground floor area, if it's through council you call it FSR, floor space ratio. Under this particular SEP or the CDC, it's called GFA, ground floor area. Quite similar but a little bit different. Now for the manors, a lot of people, they don't factor this in too, where they buy a site thinking they can do all 3 bedders, for example, with 2 bathrooms, but they don't run their calculations correct, where there's quite a bit of play that you've got to factor in, because you've obviously got your landscape areas, you've got your setbacks, you've got your driveway, your car parking. There's a whole lot of play that you need to really factor in before you can determine the yield and the size of the units on the site, because 3-bedder versus 2-bedder. If someone's run their numbers based on 4 3-bedders and all of a sudden you can only do 4 2-bedders, sometimes you can't even get 2 bathrooms based on the area and the size. And that's where it's really key to run your numbers, to run your calcs, to know your calcs. And the beauty is there's a terrific design guideline that's been built under the Low Rise Diversity Housing Code that you can tap into, that you can access to be able to know all of this information. But if you look at the way that it's calculated under the SEP, it's essentially 25% of the site plus 150 square metres. Okay, so essentially that's how you work out your calc. So I'll get my calculator out now, because I can't do it in my head. But let's just say it's a 700 square metre site. Okay, so you got to go 700 divided by 4. Is 175 plus 150, which gives you 325 square metres, okay? So then you've got to divide that across. Obviously, if you're wanting to do 4, you're going to divide that across 4. So it comes out at 81.25 square metres, okay? So you've got 81.25 square metres per dwelling. But then you need to go into the design guideline, and it gives you calculations based on a 2-bedder. If it's a 2-bedder, you need this many square meters. If it's a 3-bedder, you need this many square meters. But then it also has per additional bathroom, for example, you need an additional 5 square meters. So when you run your calcs, you'll often find that 81.25 square meters won't be enough to give you 3 bedders plus 2 bathrooms. So you've then got to look at how to set up your mix for that development. We've done a lot where it might be like, for example, we've done some where it was 2 3-bedders and 2 2-bedders, both with en-suites and all of them. We even did one where it was on a smaller site where it was 2-bed, 1 bath, 2 2-bed, 1 bath, and then 2 2-bed with 2 baths, because at the end of the day, you're constrained by how much GFA, ground floor area, you've got to work with, and you just can't fudge that. Sometimes, so you've got to be creative in how you look at that. So it's very hard to get all like 4 3-bedders with 2 bathroom. Obviously, a lot of the rental market wants the 3-bed, 2 bath. It's very hard to achieve that, and you've seen on a 600, 650 square metre site, you might be left with 2-bedders, both with en-suites in the main bedroom. So you've got to run that mix, and then there's a lot of play. You've got to determine, does it stack up? Does it work? Is it achievable? Is it possible? And so there's a lot at play. And I found the first couple of years, the problem is the market didn't know what this product was. And this is one thing we found, is how do you run numbers? How do you run numbers from a resale point of view on a product if you're looking to sell? How do you run numbers on a product that's relatively new to the market? How do you run numbers when there's no real comparables in the area of what that product actually is? Because it's not a townhouse, and essentially it's not a high-set unit either. So what is that product? So there's a lot of assumption. There's a lot of things at play, and I take my hat off to a lot of the early adopters who did take on these type of projects, because I think, I think there was obviously a high level of risk for a lot of these pioneers who really stepped into that space early in the piece. And I think for a lot of people that are keeping them as long-term holds, it's a bit different. It's a little bit easier, I guess, for agents and for people in the market to really get a good high-level understanding of the rental yield, of what that looks like. But the biggest problem I found, and this is why I think we haven't seen a lot of people doing this type of development to sell, what is it? How do you really get confident on the numbers? And I think it's still an exercise that people are getting their heads around. So for me, this is probably one of the approval types where I guess if the people involved in a lot of the planning decisions when this came about, I'm sure they'd look back with some sort of possible regrets as to why hasn't it taken off. I'll be interested to see if it does more for what it looks like, or how they can maybe look to solve this issue. But I guess for me, there is still a place for it, but it's just be really careful and be really wary, and possibly even talk to some people that have done these type of developments to get a really good understanding of what it looks like in terms of timeframes, what it looks like in terms of possible rental yields or resale, just to really get an understanding and some knowledge around how that looks and how that works. So for me, Manors are great. There's opportunities for them, but I think it really has to be the right site and the right type of development, the right type of project. I've seen some people that have capital, they need to park, where they just want to do some long-term holds, and that's where it can work okay. Again, like I said, it's probably worked best, I've found, for people who are more of a builder type developer, with maybe some concreting or bricklaying type construction methods at their disposal, where they can get on top of that type of thing, possibly guys who've done a little bit more class 2. So it's just something, don't jump in too raw, because let's face it, I've seen I'd need a couple of sets of hands to to count the amount of manor house sites I've seen the last sort of couple of years on the market, people trying to sell these sites. I only saw one recently where a client brought it to me and said, oh, it's got a CDC approval for 4. And I looked at the site and I thought, oh, without seeing the approval, and I thought, I don't know how they've got a CDC, but then it dawned on me, I bet you it's a manor house. And lo and behold, they got the plans from the agent, and all of a sudden they've got a site that just doesn't work. The reason why it was back on the market, because it just does not work. Someone's executed the approval, it doesn't stack up, it doesn't work, and then you've got people scurrying around getting excited because there's 4 on it, only to then realise when you break the news to them on some of the challenges on that site, they run their numbers and all of a sudden it just doesn't stack up. Doesn't stack up from a development point of view, and most of the time often doesn't stack up from a hold point of view either. So all of a sudden then you've got a site that'll sit there for a long time, and unfortunately the person who bought the site, if they've paid a reasonable price, well, they just probably need to take a haircut, and possibly they might just cover their costs and sell the site again. But sadly, some people have paid overs for a site, so they got overexcited, ran their numbers based on 4, didn't do their research effectively and properly, and they're left with an approval that essentially it's not so much can't be done, but won't be done because it will not stack up. And I've seen a bit of that. And the reality is, when you see a bit of that helps you really understand and know, look, it's a tricky space. You've only got to look at high rise. Now, I don't play in that space much, but I guess I've seen that because I've got a lot of clients that have come out of high-rise construction who, because of the Class 2 element, because of the headaches around it, and they're good operators, people that do the right thing, but we're seeing a lot of people now just looking to maybe scale and peg back to more your traditional townhouse, duplex, smaller developments because they don't want the headache in their life anymore. And it's quite a volatile space, and we're seeing a bit of a move back from some of that. There's still incredible opportunities through the bigger projects, but I guess there's higher risk as well. You know, I've seen the amount of developers I've seen who've really struggled through a lot of that high-rise type development because it's a tricky space to be in at the moment. And the unfortunate thing about the Manors is it's like the little brother of that type of high-rise development because it falls into the same class of building. It falls under the same type of level of scrutiny and the level of documentation and all the, I guess, the complexities that come with that. So, yeah, for me, there's a lot more we can talk about. I'm sure we'll do a backup episode where we can break down some design elements and a little bit more of the nitty-gritty on Manors, but I wanted to do this episode just to help educate the market because I do have this conversation every couple of weeks with at least one investor or developer who's investigating these opportunities. So I think this is a really good episode just to help give you some background as to why maybe we're not seeing a lot of it and why it probably hasn't taken off the way it could. And, you know, for me, there's still opportunities. We've had a few clients do quite well out of them. In the right place at the right time, but unfortunately, it's tricky. It's a tricky space, and it's one that I think the market still hasn't fully worked out, which is why I don't think any developer out there has really nailed down the Manor model, because I think there's still a lot of work at hand to make it work. So it's still very much a watch this space, and things can change too. It's good to have the knowledge and the background of these type of projects because it doesn't hurt to run your numbers on these sites when they do come up and come available to see if they stack up. Like I haven't been involved in one yet, but I'd love to see like a manor house where you can possibly have like, you know, something with some really amazing water views where it might only be possible for a dual lock or maybe not even a dual lock, where you might be able to get a manor on there by being creative and create views of some sort, or something where you can do a basement, you can where it can work. But I guess I'm yet to see one where that has taken place. If anyone knows of one, it'd be great to be able to write in and let us know about it. We could possibly even do a bit of a case study on on one and look at the ins and outs of it. But look, for me, that's an episode on manor houses under the low-rise diversity housing code via CDC pathway. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, share this around with anyone you know, even anyone you've spoken with or heard talking about manor houses who want to be more educated in this space. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week.